In a small town where whispers travel faster than facts, a mysterious man with a limp became the butt of cruel jokes, until one explosive moment changed everything. When a U.S. senator came under attack, the quiet stranger revealed the truth. He wasn't a broken man. He was a hero who had once sacrificed everything on a battlefield overseas. And now, he'd done it again. The morning sun had barely risen over the quiet town of Cedar Ridge, and already the sidewalks were buzzing with life. Joggers passed by coffee shops, teenagers skateboarded to school, and the usual crowd gathered near the hardware store to swap stories and sip lukewarm coffee. Among them, a man walked slowly, deliberately, his left leg stiff, artificial, his gait uneven. Every step was accompanied by a subtle click of carbon fiber and metal. He wore a faded army jacket, the name patch long torn off, and a baseball cap pulled low to hide the deep scar that ran from his temple to his jawline. People didn't know much about him, just that he'd moved into town about 6 months ago. He didn't say much, and he didn't smile often. To the kids, he was a source of mocking amusement. They called him Captain Limp. Even adults chuckled when he passed by, whispering things like, "Probably faking it for sympathy," or "Looks like he drinks his breakfast." But on a humid Thursday in June, everything changed. It happened in the heart of town. Right outside the county courthouse, Senator Madeline Harrow had arrived for a town hall meeting, her team touting a new veterans health care initiative. She was all smiles, greeting locals and posing for pictures as she crossed the square. The crowd was thick, too thick. That's when the first shot rang out. Screams erupted as people scattered in every direction. Chaos consumed the square. A second shot cracked through the air, this time hitting the stone column behind the senator. Panic turned into a stampede. Security scrambled, shields up, weapons drawn, but they had no idea where the shooter was, except one man, the limping stranger, halfway across the plaza, had dropped his cup of coffee before the second shot rang. In an instant, he moved not away from the danger, but toward it. He ducked low behind the vendor cart, eyes scanning, his body instinctively tracking angles, elevations, and potential cover. Then he saw it, an old maintenance building across the street, second window open. Just a crack, a muzzle flash. Without hesitation, he sprinted. The limp was real, so was the pain. But his body remembered what his mind wouldn't forget: firefights in Fallujah, ambushes in Kandahar, the sting of shrapnel, and the ringing silence that follows. A mortar blast. He reached the building and barreled through the door, up to flights, down a narrow hall. Another shot. He didn't wait. He crashed through the door shoulder first, tackled the sniper to the ground, wrestled the rifle away, and secured the weapon. It was over in seconds. By the time local police arrived, the shooter, a radical extremist with a political vendetta, was zip-tied to a radiator, face down. Groaning in pain, the limp stranger stood beside him, breathing hard, his army jacket torn, a streak of blood on his arm. "Who the hell are you?" one officer asked, stunned. The man looked down, then slowly took off his cap. "Staff Sergeant Daniel Keane, retired," he said. "82nd Airborne. Lost my leg protecting that senator in Kabul, 2013. Guess I just did it again." Word spread like wildfire. By evening, every local station, every national network was covering the story. Pictures of Sergeant Keane standing tall, well, as tall as he could beside the senator, flooded social media. The same people who had laughed now lined up outside his modest house to apologize, to thank him, to salute. Senator Harrow herself visited him the next morning with a full security escort. She didn't bring cameras, just a handwritten letter and a hug. "I owe you my life," she whispered. Again, he just smiled faintly and replied, "Maybe now they'll stop calling me Captain Limp." From that day forward, no one in Cedar Ridge looked at him the same, because now they knew he wasn't broken. He was a hero. The days that followed were a blur for Daniel Keane. He wasn't used to the attention, wasn't looking for it either, but it found him anyway. A bronze plaque appeared overnight on the courthouse wall, etched with the words, "In honor of Staff Sergeant Daniel Keane, who chose courage over comfort." A local bakery renamed their best-selling pastry the Keane Hero, and the mayor declared a town-wide Daniel Keane Day. But for Daniel, the real reward was quieter. The kids who once giggled behind his back now ran up to him on the sidewalk, wide-eyed, asking if they could see his prosthetic leg. He didn't mind. He'd kneel down well, try to and tell them stories, not about war or violence, but about bravery, about standing up when it's easier to sit down, about choosing right over easy. One boy, maybe 8 years old, had tugged on his sleeve one afternoon and said, "I want to be like you when I grow up." Daniel blinked hard, smiled, and replied, "Just be kind, kid. That's where it starts." Still, nights were harder. No headlines could quiet the echoes in his head, the bursts of gunfire in his dreams, the faces of men he couldn't save. His leg wasn't the only thing he'd lost overseas. He'd lost friends, brothers, parts of himself that couldn't be replaced by titanium and Kevlar. One night, after another local news crew had left his porch, Daniel sat alone on his front step, rubbing the side of his knee where the phantom pain still flared. The quiet was heavy, but then a soft voice broke the silence. "Sergeant Keane." He looked up. A woman stood at the edge of his lawn, mid-40s, auburn hair, eyes filled with something between curiosity and gratitude. "You probably don't remember me," she said, stepping forward. "But I remember you, my brother. He served with you, Private Andrew Latham." Daniel's breath caught. "Drew?" he asked quietly. "Latham from Charlie Company." She nodded, tears already forming. "He talked about you in his letters, said you saved him in Najaf, before the roadside bomb." Daniel stared at the ground, remembering the dust, the screams, the impossible choices. "I never got to thank you," she said, "until now." He swallowed hard. For the first time in years, words failed him. She sat beside him on the step. "You didn't just save a senator," she said gently. "You saved my brother once. You've probably saved more people than you'll ever know." And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Daniel Keane cried, not from pain or guilt or shame but from release. From knowing he was seen. Months passed. Cedar Ridge changed. Or maybe it had just remembered how to care again. Daniel started volunteering at the local high school, giving talks to students about leadership, grit, and what it means to serve something greater than yourself. The school started a veteran outreach program. A quiet ripple of purpose spread across town. He no longer had to wear the faded army jacket for people to recognize him. They recognized him in the way he held the door for others, in the way he listened, in the quiet nods exchanged with other veterans who now walked with a little more pride. And every year, on that same Thursday in June, the town held a silent moment in the square. Not for the sniper, not for the senator, but for the man with the limp who walked into danger when everyone else ran. Not for glory, not for thanks, but because that's who he was. Staff Sergeant Daniel Keane, a man who lost a leg and reminded a town how to stand tall. The second year after the incident, Cedar Ridge felt different, not busier, not louder, but more awake. The town had always been small, tucked between forgotten highways and winding rivers, but now it had something rare, a shared story that made it feel proud. Daniel Keane, for his part, never let the attention change him. He still lived in the same modest rental on Maple Street, still limped down to the diner every morning for the same cup of black coffee, still fixed the old Veterans Memorial with his own tools, even when no one asked him to. But what did change was the way people treated one another. Maybe it was Daniel's influence. Maybe it was the way his quiet strength reminded people what really mattered. Or maybe it was the high school students who started organizing fundraisers for wounded vets. After Daniel's first classroom talk left half of them in tears. Either way, something shifted. One rainy afternoon, the high school principal invited Daniel to give the commencement speech at graduation. At first, he refused. "I'm not a speaker," he told her. "You're a leader," she said. "That's what they need." So on a warm June evening, standing under a canopy on a football field surrounded by folding chairs and proud parents, Daniel Keane took the mic. He stood still for a long moment, adjusting the sleeve of his suit jacket over his prosthetic arm, the one most people hadn't even noticed yet. Then he spoke. "You know," he said, scanning the crowd, "most of my life, I've been taught to move quietly, follow orders, and not draw attention. But life has a way of giving you moments where staying quiet isn't enough. He paused. You will have those moments, every one of you. And when they come, I hope you choose courage. Not the kind they put in movies, but the kind that walks into rooms filled with doubt, or steps between harm and the people you love, or apologizes when it's hard. He glanced down briefly before looking back at them. I lost a leg in Afghanistan. Lost friends too. But I also found something. I found that even one person, just one, can change everything. Not because they're perfect, but because they show up when it counts. He smiled softly. You don't have to wear a uniform to serve. You just have to care more than you're comfortable with. When the crowd stood and applauded, Daniel's face stayed calm, but his eyes brimmed with emotion. Not because of the claps, but because the small town, this once dismissive, whispering town, had become something he never expected. Home. That fall, Daniel helped start a non-profit. One Step Forward. It offered prosthetics and therapy support to combat veterans, but it also worked with young people, kids who'd grown up without fathers, teens on the edge of trouble. Daniel showed them what resilience looked like, not by preaching, just by being there. Word got out. Donations came in. Veterans from surrounding counties started visiting. Some asked for help. Some just asked for someone to talk to. And Daniel always made time. One morning, as he helped a boy repair an old bicycle in the non-profit's garage, a familiar voice called from the front, "Sergeant Keane?" He turned. Senator Madeleine Harrow stood there again, this time in jeans and a sweater. No camera crew, no entourage. "I just came to say thank you again." Daniel wiped his hands on a towel. Still breathing. HUD still protected by the same man. She smiled. "Congress just passed a funding bill for rural veteran services. Your story was part of the testimony." He raised an eyebrow. "My story." She stepped closer. "It's not just about what you did in Kabul, or even here. It's about what you're still doing." She looked around the workshop, saw the kids, the flags, the prosthetic limbs stacked like tools of hope. "You've built something that matters," she said. "I just thought you should know." Years later, when Daniel Keane passed quietly in his sleep at age 68, Cedar Ridge mourned not with fanfare, but with silence. Storefronts draped black ribbons. The high school flew its flag at half-mast. Veterans across the county made the long trip in trucks and vans and old motorcycles, each of them limping, scarred, or grizzled, but all standing straight as the procession passed. He was buried at the edge of town under a maple tree. His tombstone read simply, "Staff Sergeant Daniel Keane walked into fire so others wouldn't have to." One leg lost, a town found. And every June, on a quiet Thursday morning, the town of Cedar Ridge gathers. In the square, no speeches, no big ceremony, just a moment of silence, and the soft sound of footsteps walking forward. By the third year after the shooting, One Step Forward had outgrown its original garage. What began as a single-room workshop behind Daniel Keane's house was now a full community. Center painted in deep green and tan, the colors of Daniel's old unit. Its walls were lined with photos, flags, and handmade thank you notes from children and veterans alike. There was a reading room with shelves of donated books, a training center where injured veterans could relearn basic skills, and a therapy space where local counselors volunteered their time. On the wall at the entrance, etched into bronze, was a quote from Daniel himself: "Don't wait to be whole to do good. Start where you are. Limp if you must." The phrase had become something of a motto around town. You could see it on bumper stickers, pinned on school backpacks, and stitched into patches on the sleeves of teenagers who once mocked Daniel and now volunteered at his center every weekend. Even nearby towns began asking, what changed Cedar Ridge? The answer was always the same: one man, one limp, one choice to run toward danger when everyone else ran away. In the years that followed Daniel's passing, people continued walking into the center, not just for help but to help others. His legacy had become more than a story. It had become a movement. A young woman named Alia, once a troubled teen who Daniel had personally mentored, became the new director of the nonprofit. She kept his photo framed on her desk and often shared how Daniel had changed her life. When she was too angry to listen to anyone but him, She expanded the program into neighboring counties, opened new branches, and in every speech she gave, she told the story that changed her path. He didn't just teach me how to walk straight. He taught me that limping forward is still moving forward. Veterans who had once isolated themselves found new purpose leading classes and building prosthetics for others. Local high schoolers earned scholarships through the Keane Fellowship, which rewarded students for acts of quiet bravery and community leadership. And once a year, without fail, the senator returned to Cedar Ridge. Madeline Harrow, now in her 70s, always arrived unannounced, walking quietly among the growing crowds that gathered in the town square for the memorial walk. It wasn't a parade. No loudspeakers, no banners, just a long line of people, many limping, some in wheelchairs, some walking slowly, moving in silence along the route where Daniel had once charged toward a gunman. The walk ended at his gravesite, beneath the old maple tree. There, someone always read a single letter, one that Daniel had written years before, and left sealed with instructions to open only after he was gone. Dear Cedar Ridge, if you're reading this, I've probably gone on ahead. No need to mourn, just promise me you'll keep walking. I didn't save that senator alone. I didn't build this community alone. Every choice I made was followed by another. Yours. You picked up the tools, you healed the wounds, you turned a limp into a lesson. If I've done anything worth remembering, let it be this: don't underestimate quiet courage. It doesn't always look like a hero in a cape. Sometimes it looks like a kid showing up at school even when life is hard. A single mother working 2 jobs and still finding time to listen. A man with a limp who refuses to stay seated. You don't have to be perfect. Just keep moving forward with gratitude. Danielle. That letter hung framed inside the Cedar Ridge Town Hall now. Beneath it, etched into the wood, were the final words he'd ever written. My limp was never weakness. It was proof I got back up. And that, in the end, was what people remembered most. Not the gunman, not the news headlines, not even the senator, but a quiet man who walked with a limp and taught the world how to rise. Years passed. The maple tree above Daniel Keane's grave grew broader, its leaves casting long, thoughtful shadows across the grass. Veterans, families, and students still came, placing stones, medals, or simple handwritten notes at the base of his tombstone. No one ever came for spectacle, only for reflection. Eventually, his story made its way into school textbooks, not as a chapter on war, but one on citizenship. The curriculum called it the Keane Principle, the idea that bravery is not loud but lasting. His life became a symbol not just of military valor, but of community transformation, how one act of selflessness can echo through generations. In Washington, a bronze statue was erected just outside the Department of Veterans Affairs. Not in a battle pose, not holding a weapon. The statue showed a man in a field jacket, head bowed, walking forward with one prosthetic leg and a hand outstretched behind him, as if reaching for someone who had fallen. Beneath it, the inscription read, Staff Sergeant Daniel Keane. He led by limping forward. In Cedar Ridge, the nonprofit had grown into a national foundation. One Step Forward operated centers in 15 states, partnering with hospitals, schools, and prisons. Its focus had expanded, helping not just veterans, but anyone struggling to reclaim their footing after life had knocked them down. Single parents, addiction survivors, foster youth, former inmates, people who had been labeled broken. At every level, the organization used Daniel's story not as a tale of triumph, but as permission to heal. And they kept his rules simple. Everyone has a limp. Everyone deserves another chance. We walk together. One day, nearly 20 years after Daniel's death, Aliano, CEO of the foundation, stood on a national stage accepting a humanitarian award. She wore a small dog tag around her neck that Daniel had given her when she was 16. In her speech, she said, "He saved lives with his body, yes, but he saved souls with his belief in us." Daniel Keane was the first man who didn't see my past as a reason to walk away. He limped toward me, not around me, and because of that, everything changed. Across the country, millions watched. Many had never heard of Daniel Keane before, but after that speech, they did. Donations surged. Veterans sent in letters. Kids wrote essays. A group of students in Montana created a podcast called Limp Toward the Light, where guests talked about the scars visible and invisible that shaped them and how they kept moving anyway. Back in Cedar Ridge, the town had changed more than anyone ever imagined. The old courthouse had been renamed the Keane Civic Center. What once housed Dusty Records now held community programming, literacy clinics, and mental health outreach. Every new town employee received an orientation that included the story of Daniel's walk across that square and the values he left behind. But the heart of it all remained quiet, peaceful. Each year, during the memorial walk, people carried signs that read, "I walk for my dad. I walk for the one who couldn't. I walk because he did." One year, a young girl limped near the front. She had been born with a congenital disorder and used a custom brace. She wore a green jacket much too big for her, sleeves rolled up, and a button on her collar that simply said, DK. Her father asked if she wanted him to carry her. She shook her head and said, no. He didn't get carried either. At the end of every memorial walk, the crowd paused for 2 minutes of silence. Then, like every year before, someone, usually a young person, would step forward to read the same line aloud. He didn't walk to be honored. He walked because someone had to. And then the crowd would walk home, not to forget, but to remember what it means to show up, even when you limp. And every so often, as wind rustled the maple leaves above Daniel Keane's grave, someone would swear they could almost hear his voice again, calm, steady, and full of grit. One step forward, that's all it takes. It was spring again in Cedar Ridge, the kind of warm, golden spring Daniel Keane used to love. The air smelled of fresh grass and distant rain. Children laughed in the park he'd once helped rebuild. Veterans sat on benches near the square, sipping coffee and sharing quiet conversations. Life had found rhythm again, but not routine. It was a town transformed not by tragedy, but by choice. A choice to remember and to keep becoming better. On the anniversary of his act, the one that turned scorn into reverence, the town placed a final stone at the foot of the maple tree where Daniel lay. It was simple, unpolished, etched with just 3 words: we remember forward, not back. Not with pity, but with purpose. That evening, as the sun sank low and fireflies blinked to life along the quiet streets, the town square lit up with soft lanterns, not the kind released into the sky, but the kind placed gently along the walkways, illuminating each step people took. There was no podium, no speech, just people walking, some upright, some in braces, some on crutches, some in wheelchairs, but all moving together, forward. Among them were teachers, factory workers, single mothers, retired Marines, Little League coaches, students who had been born long after Daniel's passing. None of them needed to know the whole story. They felt it. A town that once laughed at a limp now honored it, not because it showed weakness, but because it revealed a kind of strength most never understood until they saw it face to face. A quiet man walking into danger, not to be remembered, but because he couldn't live with doing anything less. And in that simple truth, the limp, the courage, the choice to walk forward anyway, the town of Cedar Ridge found not just its hero, but its heart.